putting the proverbial plate for the children first instead of the husband, your children are not going to pick up on the messages that the husband needs to be served first, not just food, but in all aspects. And I think that's going to be detrimental for them once they grow up and they're trying to date and get married themselves. So,
This question is marriage comes before kids. Agree, disagree? We can start with Enos this time.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think that if it doesn't come first, it creates a whole lot of problems, right? You're not teaching your children the dynamic that they should be aspiring to when they choose their partners, right? And then even when the children are grown, what do you have left if you're not putting your partner first? At the end of the day, if you two are working together in tandem, especially as a woman, if you're following that man's program and instilling those values in those children, I don't understand how else it's supposed to work, right? If you're not putting your partner first, because if you're putting your children first, you often see that, whether it's the man or the woman, somebody's being neglected, and it's showing an unhealthy dynamic to those children. It's instilling certain values, whether it's spoken or not, through example, through action. So I wholeheartedly agree. I think your spouse comes before the children every time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that as well. And this is coming from someone who did have a child before marriage. I don't regret it, but if I could redo it, I would have definitely made sure I got married first because it definitely does it changes the dynamic of everything. And I just feel like it's a what you looking like that for, Saida? You disagree?
Um, I'm no, I'm disagreeing for me, my case. Like I
Oh,
have a
okay,
kid, I have
okay.
a kid, but even if I was married to her father, I'll be divorced by now. But so
True. And
because
I think that comes
you
down to
guys
like
know the situation I went through, so
right.
I think it depends on scenario, it depends on the circumstances. And if I think about I think it's about how intentional you are and the values that you have. Because what is marriage? You could behave like a wife and be a wife without having a document that says that you are a wife. Because I look back and my grandparents were not married until like they had like 4 kids, and they had six in total. But a lot of elderly people like didn't marry quite like right away. So they waited for quite some time, but they had in their mind, and they were behaving, and they were committed to their relationship. So I think it depends. There's people that haven't got married, and they've been together for years, and for good. So I think it depends on the circumstances, I would say. But
Well, when I was
ideally,
right,
yes, I agree that that's the best way to do things.
absolutely no. I so when I was talking, I was like referring to probably marrying a different person. I wasn't talking about the person I had a kid with. I'm talking about I would have married, I guess, the correct person. But I guess you don't know till you get into that situation. But trying to find a person to marry that before you actually, have a kid with them. But Chanel,
yeah, I think the hierarchy is husband, wife, children. Well, God, husband, wife, children. It's important to keep your spouse first, quote unquote. And I say quote unquote because, of course, you're going to protect your children and feed your children and stuff like that. But in the household, it's very important to show that regard to your spouse because your children need to see that growing up. I think a lot of people put an emphasis on being a parent, a good parent, which is great. But part of that is showing your children what a good husband is or what a good wife is. And I don't think you can see those roles unless you're actually living those roles. So if you're putting the proverbial plate for the children first instead of the husband, your children are not going to pick up on the messages that the husband needs to be served first, not just food, but in all aspects. And I think that's going to be detrimental for them once they grow up and they're trying to date and get married themselves. So.
Lucky. I'm not sure if you heard the question.
No, that's what I was asking you if you could put the question up.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the question was marriage comes before kids.
What's the question?
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you feel like
I
marriage
mean,
should
you
come
know,
before
in these conversations, we pretty much say that a lot. Like,
kids?
who's arguing that at this point? You know what I'm saying? It's like we know it comes before, but are we going to have realistic conversations about how we actually mate? Nobody is meeting your father, and if we have these conversations where most men that you've met in your life, whether you were single, did those men actually take the necessary steps to say, I want to meet your father before I slept with you? So it's like, yeah, we know the normal way to do things. And would your father okay them to marry you? You know what I'm saying? So how we mate with each other, we know the right things to do, but I think the problem is that most people choose to mate and be accepted instead of setting their boundaries and their standards because they don't want to, be right back out there again. They kind of want to settle down fast. So I think that's pretty much the problem. But definitely marriage does come before kids. But how we date now is we put sex before everything. Like we're okay with having sex with men before we actually spend money on them. But I don't know about you, I can get my money back. You know what I'm saying? I cannot unsleep with this person or undo those things. So I think we have to probably ask the questions now, like, should we continue to sleep with men before we actually get commitment? Like, maybe that's more of a question, and I think we should ask instead of saying marriage, because
Yeah.
if we understand marriage minded women or people, they're not going to lead with sex, but most people lead with sex. So, and that, which means most people aren't marriage minded. That's how I
Yeah,
would answer that
and
question.
don't you think that a lot of times people are comfortable having the whole family dynamic without the piece of paper because it's not that important to everyone. They'll build a whole empire with their significant other and then they'll have kids and they say paper doesn't matter. So
I think
um
marriage is not a piece of paper. How did they get married before the government said you need this
Oh,
paper?
you just took the words out my
They got
mouth.
right,
married with a spiritual connection that it's an oath
right.
under God. Most people can't even stick to their own word, let alone God's word. So
Talk
if we're
about it.
talking about what marriage was, then
Hmm.
marriage is an actual relationship that you and your partner is going under God and you're going to continue to go there for problems. But if we're saying a contract, I think that's also beneficial to your kids because you want to leave them something under a union, not something they would have to fight for if you die. We just say, oh, it's just a piece of paper, just to dismiss the fact, but you're doing everything as if
Right.
you're married. So it's like if you just want to be a jump off for the rest of your life, that's really what it is.
I agree. I agree with Lucky. Is what the value that we give to the paper, like money. Money's paper. It is just paper, but it's
Cool.
not just paper because we give the value to it. So it's same with marriage. So it's like how hard you want to work for it, and what are the benefits that this is bringing you, and the effort that you have to put to get this. And because at the end of the day, you get into a role thinking that it's just a contract, and I see a lot of people nowadays thinking that getting a ring is the actual lasting or the goal, when that's the start line, that's the beginning. You haven't you have accomplished something, yes. Not too many people get to that part nowadays, but that's not the end. The hardest part is coming. That's what it is. And like, if you look at it just as a contract, I don't know. You're wrong automatically.